Hi.
Hello.
Welcome to Trinity Talk Live, eventually. I'm Ken Coughlin.
And I'm Ben.
That's your cue. So much has gone wrong already. Don't forget your name, okay? Don't forget your name. Yeah, if anybody's finding us, great. Lovely. Hopefully more of you will find us. I put a link to this stream on the old streams page. Yeah, we went live, and YouTube decided that 1 second was long enough for our live stream and cut it off after a second. So we had to scramble to create a
They're
new
finally
one.
Getting us back for all those things.
For the thing we did last week, yeah. So we had to scramble real quick to create a new live stream feed to get this up on the air as quickly as possible. So for those of you that were trying to watch us live and got confused by the old link, I apologize for that. Hopefully you'll migrate over and realize that we actually are live, just not on the link that I published on every single Facebook page ever. So like people are going to go on and watch the show and they're not going to have the right link to it. But sometimes I don't like technology. Anyway, hey, if this is your first time watching the show, not every week goes like this. I promise.
Yeah.
Welcome to the show. This is Water Cooler Conversation from a Christian perspective, which that sums up what the show is all about. What we try to do here is we try to talk about things that people out there in the world are talking about. Some of the stories might specifically involve Christian topics. Some might be more of a general public interest. But what makes the show unique is we do try to bring a uniquely Christian perspective to it. So we talk about these topics in a way different than you might hear otherwise out there on the internet, always trying to put Christ first. That's the goal. We don't always agree. We don't always, we may agree, we may disagree. You may agree with us, you may disagree with us, but we hope that you'll see that that's exactly at least what our goal is. And I'm gonna spin things around a little bit because I actually posted this link to this show tonight on one of our NALC pages, and there was some commentary about it. And so there might actually be some people there trying to watch it and going to the old link. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna throw you for a loop.
Okay.
All right. The next part. Advance to the next lower third, Mary Kay. I'm gonna have you invite people to join the show and give that whole spiel while I'm trying to post the new link.
All right.
Awesome.
Yeah, so what we typically do, this is a audience participation show, as we typically say, and what we encourage you to do is to engage with us. So I know that's difficult to do, maybe if you're on a dead link right now, but hopefully you'll be finding us here on our live link. And what you can do is you can comment, whether you're watching us on Facebook, just comment in the comment section, or if you're watching us on YouTube, you can comment in the live chat. And either of those locations, what they will do is once you put them, hopefully if it all goes through correctly, will show up in this box right here to my left. That way we will be able to see your comments and respond in real time, plus or minus 30 seconds. And so
I think it's actually like 20, but yeah.
20 seconds, roughly on average. So, yeah, we encourage it. Really, it makes it more dynamic, more engaging, and we love that interaction. So we really encourage you to do so. And yeah, or one thing also that we try to do each week, even if you somehow found us on a dead link and we've already gone off the air by the time you find us.
If we haven't had enough technical difficulties, can you stop talking for
Sure.
What now?
There's something wrong with his mic.
Uh-oh.
Is his mic not working?
He sounds like he's coming from down the well.
Which means you're just hearing him through my mic. He's unmuted, right?
He's unmuted, yeah.
Unplug it, plug it back in.
It's the IT response. Bear with us for 1 second. All right. Is that any better? Check.
Say it again.
Testing.
Really?
Check 1, 2. I'm still down the well. All right. Well, no pun intended. Try this again.
What's that, Lassie? Ben's down the well.
Wait. Talk again.
All right. Take 2 or 3 or 4. All right. Hopefully this is better.
Yeah.
So, as I was saying, even if you find us after the fact, if you're watching us when we are no longer live streaming, You can still comment in the comment section on YouTube where you find this video, and we will go back and we'll try to read our comments from each previous week's episode and address those comments there. Provided we, of course, ask that you keep it respectful, keep it, keep the dialogue engaging and on topic. But or if there's anything that you'd like us to talk about, maybe throw us for a loop. We like that here.
Because that's the topic of the show today.
Yeah, little did
we haven't been thrown for any loops yet, so.
But no, we really do, in all seriousness, encourage that engagement and that interaction. We really enjoy it. So yeah, please do so. Please comment and join the conversation.
All right, I have posted to that group again, so hopefully if there is anybody there that was looking to watch the show, they now have the correct link. Thank you for your patience, everybody. Now let's dive right in. We have 4 topics we're going to be talking about tonight, and Ben, you're going to introduce our first one.
All right.
By the way, there were no comments on last.
Yeah, I did check.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? Before we get going, that reminds me. Thank you, Mary Kay. I did check on that. I did want to say, we didn't have any new comments or anything from last week, but I did want to give a shout out to somebody on the off chance he's watching, which is a real off chance because of the links changing and everything. But there is a gentleman by the name of Brian Brownell, Brownell. I'm sorry, Brian Brownell, who has clearly been going through and watching some of our old programs, because in the last few days he's commented on 3 different episodes. Now, these are older episodes that, be honest, we don't have time to comment on all old episodes. And Brian, if you do happen to either rewatching this now or eventually you're working your way through the episodes and a month from now you get to this one, I just wanted to let you know that we do see the comments. And generally the policy here that we try to follow is that if you can't watch the show live, that's fine, that's great. Go ahead and comment it on YouTube during that ensuing week right afterwards. And then if you do, then we will try to pick up with your comment at the start of the next week's show and respond to you that way. So, but I wanted to give him a shout out because, like 3 different episodes he's been watching. He's been mentioning things. So, Brian, if you do catch up, that's kind of the way we do things right here as far as responding to comments after the fact. So please, I'm glad to know you're watching and hopefully enjoy the program.
Thanks for finding us. Thanks for
exactly. So anyway.
I really do appreciate it. Oh, and one other minor thing is we're without masks.
Yes.
That's we're getting back to
start slowly but surely getting back to normal.
Yeah.
No chihuahuas necessary.
That's right. Our first story for tonight. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard the name John Cena. He's pretty much a household name at this point. A famous actor or pro wrestler, gone actor in a la Hulk Hogan and other celebrities like that. But John Cena is famous for, particularly one of his roles is in the Fast and the Furious franchise. And so he just finished filming, or they recently finished filming, the Fast and the Furious 9, which was filmed over in China, and or a lot of the filming was backed by Chinese support, financial support. So John Cena, in an interview within the past week or so, he created a stir, created issue backlash when he inadvertently referred to Taiwan as a country. He said that in his original quote was that Taiwan was the first country that will be able to view the Fast and the Furious 9. That was what it was in reference to, because it's going to be premiering in China first as kind of a nod or an homage to the people who helped fund the filming of this movie. And so that created backlash among the Chinese, particularly because if you're unfamiliar with it, the tension between China and Taiwan. Taiwan has a history of wanting to secede effectively from China, and China does not recognize Taiwan's moves for cessation and for their own governance. So this created a backlash, and John Cena has over the past decade or so been learning Mandarin Chinese. And so he issued an apology in Chinese, and he was saying he's very, 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 very sorry. It was a very belabored apology to the Chinese people, saying, I love and respect Chinese people. It was a mistake. Basically, he was recanting what he said about effectively what we would maybe, or those of us in the United States might view it as a slip of the tongue, but it was very, I guess, controversial in China, because anything that goes against what they see as the
Party line.
The party line, yeah, exactly. Thank you. Is
Pun intended.
Yeah,
That's all right.
yeah, and it's offensive to them. So he was recanting and issuing an apology, and it's had mixed reviews, both in the U.S. and in China. Some people have been understanding. Others in China, especially, were unimpressed. They wanted him to go even further and not only say that he made a mistake, but say what exactly the Chinese party line is that Taiwan is a member of China. They're
not a country of their own, right?
Country of their own. He wanted to specifically state that is what some people were calling for. So it created this whole uproar, and then in the U.S., especially when it created questions and concerns over here as far as where does that lead with freedom of speech, and a lot of countries are not as free as we are, as we see in China, especially. There's a crackdown on freedom of speech. So that, kind of in a nutshell, is what happened. What are your thoughts on what happened?
Well, I decided when I read the story that it's been a really long time since one of the viewers of the program has accused me of being wishy-washy and playing both sides. So I figured this would be a good story to do it on. Sure. Anyway, I do want to. I think it's important to start out this conversation with an accurate understanding of the history and the facts, because one thing I have seen going on, we'll get to how I actually feel about China in a minute, and well, I should say not about China, but about the apology and all that. But one reaction I've seen, because we live in the social media meme era, where everything's got to be summed up with a picture in one sentence. A lot of people just saying Taiwan is a country, or Taiwan's not a country, or and for those people on both sides, I want to say, well, okay, how'd you come to that conclusion? To quote Greg Kokel, because I would venture a guess that most people are speaking instinctively, and they haven't really looked at the history to figure out, okay, why are the people in China being offended by this? Should they be? Why does Taiwan think of itself as its own independent nation? One thing out of the gate, understand that the United States government does not recognize Taiwan as being its own independent country. Officially, right. Yeah. Now, there's a lot of unofficial things and support that the U.S. provides to Taiwan, but the official stance is they don't recognize Taiwan as being its own independent nation. And the way this gets complicated is Taiwan, I'm not going to go back. I found an article that goes back since at the dawn of time. No, basically, that's not important. But basically, Taiwan was part of the Qing dynasty, China's Qing dynasty up until about 1895, and then there was the first Sino-Japanese War, where they ended up China basically had to give Taiwan to Japan after that war.
They ceded it over.
It over to Japan, right? And so then after World War II, and at this point the Qing dynasty is still around, okay? But after World War II, Japan, losers of the war, China on the winning side of the war, had to give Taiwan back. Well, and at that time, the U.S. government, everybody was UK, all the allies were fine with that. Then there was a Clinton.
Read it first.
Yeah. So. Clinton, where are you? Are you local? Put in the comments if you are local. We are in Joppa, Maryland. We're about just a bit north east of Baltimore. And for those of you who don't know, Clinton here has placed a comment on our YouTube page. Facebook. I'm sorry, Facebook page. It's not directly related to the comment section, but it's very important, and we need to stop for a second to address it. If you are in this area, we can help you. Okay, we can help you. You can go to, if you want, this is in writing, you can go to trinityjoppa.org, and then you scroll down. How did you get to the food ministry page? It's under
outreach, so it's the yellowish section. Under outreach, you'll see our food ministry page. It just says Trinity Food Ministry. Food
Ministry. You click on that. It's got the hours that we're open. We're open 3 days a week. And what day is today? I've already looked. Today's Wednesday. So
tomorrow.
It's open tomorrow. So you could come by tomorrow afternoon, and we will set you up. All right. So yeah, go to that. Go to that page. And we'll give you the hours. And if you if you have any other questions, you can email. I'm going to give you Ben's email because he's on air. He's B Lander. So B like Blander. He's kind of Blander. BLANDER at trinityjapa.org. Shoot him an email. He can fill you in any details. But if you are here in the area, we'd be more than happy to help you out. Okay. All right.
And thanks for reaching out.
Yes, please. That's what we're here for. That's more important than any topics we're talking about on the show. All right. So after World War II, Japan, like I said, had to give Taiwan back to China under the Qing dynasty. But then the communist uprising happened, and the Qing dynasty basically was overthrown. Now, the leader at the time, whose name is escaping me, I have to look it up here, the leader of the Qing dynasty, Chiang Kai-shek, actually fled to Taiwan, and along with a lot of his political allies, so to speak. And so they kind of set up shop in Taiwan, and their stance was originally, we're the true rulers of China. These other folks are usurpers, and their intent was to go back and take over China. And up until, I think it was the 1970s or 1980s, that government, even though they were in Taiwan, actually had the United Nations seat for China. And then, now eventually, however, the United Nations recognized the official government in Beijing. And now I think only like 15 countries even recognize the government in Taiwan as being the official government. Right. They are... I think it's called the Taiwanese Republic of China is what the actual governmental name is, as I recall. And so and what happened even after the Qing dynasty, folks, they got a lot of pressure in Taiwan to set up a democratic form of government. And so they did. And so now you have the situation where in Taiwan, they have, democratic elections, things like that. Whereas in China, obviously it's a communist regime. And that's where we find ourselves. So Taiwan saying, no, we're our own independent country. China saying, no, you're part of China.
And since the 80s, too, I think that article also mentions that China has tried to bridge that gap a little bit, so to speak, under the, one nation, two system kind of policy that they
kind of like what they did for Hong Kong.
Right.
But frankly, what's been happening in Hong Kong the last few years probably doesn't give Taiwan a lot of confidence.
Well, and that's, I guess, where the friction, some of that friction stems from. So they very much, the Taiwanese, there's a overwhelming support for independence from the Taiwanese.
Yeah. And I want to thank you, Mike Hinman and Mary Kay, our producer here, who have both posted links in the chat on Facebook to help Clinton out there. So awesome. Thank you guys.
Thank you, Mike. And Mary Kay.
Yeah. Mary Kay is the supervisor of the food ministry. So you're definitely, Clinton, coming to the right place because the producer right there behind camera can tell you everything there is to know about the food ministry here. So I guess I just preface all that to say that we need to come to this issue educated and not be jumping to conclusions. Like a lot of people will say, Taiwan's its own nation. Well, okay, if you've come to that conclusion because you've looked at the history and that's what you believe to be true, great. Same thing with the other way around. Sure. But there is a complicated history to it. There absolutely is a complicated history to it. Now, put a pin in that, and let's get to John Cena's apology. Here's my concern. You want to know what the weakness is, how you get to a capitalistic society? Hit him in the pocketbook. That's how it hurts. I mean, let's look at what happened here, all right? You've got two, I can't say countries, two places, all right? Taiwan and China, all right? The people in Taiwan are, we're our own country, we're our own country, we're our own country. People in China are, no, you're not, no, you're not, no, you're not. John Cena in an interview, slip of the tongue, I agree, refers to Taiwan as a country. People in China get upset about that. What's he do? He apologizes to the people in China.
Profusely.
Well, wait a minute. Don't you think that apology to the people in China, just as calling Taiwan a country was offensive to the people in China, don't you think coming back and apologizing to China is now going to be considered offensive to the people in Taiwan?
Right.
What's the difference? Why do you opt to issue that apology to China? Because China spends a lot of money on U.S. cinema.
Yeah.
And that's where there's a couple other articles I read where people say this seems like such a forced apology. And I agree. It's the almighty dollar. And at what point do we not. We as Christians obviously shouldn't. That should not be our motivating factor.
No.
We have a saying that we got from a movie in our family. Do the right thing, come what may. And I worry about things like this because, like, even if you have the government in China that isn't able to overtly control, the comings and goings here in the United States, the more economically invested we become in China, the more they're not stupid.
Sure.
And they realize they can influence America through the almighty dollar, through that economic impact.
Look at the national debt and how much of that we owe to China.
Yeah.
Yeah. And placing myself a little bit in John Cena's shoes, I mean, not that I can say 100% what his intent was in that, but it seems to me, and it was a little unclear in the article, whether this movie would be shown simultaneously, like be released at the same time to China and Taiwan, because Taiwan is part of China. So if he was saying that Taiwan, his original comment was Taiwan is one of the first countries that will be able to view this movie, and that's what ended up getting him in trouble. Did he mean that China was and Taiwan's included in that? Probably.
Okay, I don't know when exactly this starts, but I'm kind of a movie file, so I do know part of the possible answer to that. The way China, U.S. releases are aired in China, a U.S. movie cannot be released in China over the summer months. And so, like, if you have something that releases here in July, it won't release in there until sometime in September. And the reason is because that's the big blockbuster, big money dollar time of year, and the Chinese government wants to restrict those months to Chinese-made films.
Okay.
And so they don't let. So I don't know when that starts, though, whether or not this is considered part of their summer or not. Whenever this movie was released, so it's possible the answer to that is no.
And if it's being bankrolled by the Chinese, isn't it a Chinese-made film?
No, that's not. It's not made by. It's still a U.S. production company.
So okay, so it's
and I don't know bankroll. I mean, I think they probably do film some of it in China. I know it's a very popular franchise in China. But so it is possible, depending on when that deadline falls, that it maybe is being released in China, but it also might not be, not until the fall. So.
Yeah, just seemingly
He's
from.
right.
Oh, wait a minute. But you know what? No, it has been released in China because one of the articles mentioned what the opening gross receipts were.
Yeah, exactly.
So it has been released. Yeah,
It has been released. You're right. To the tune of, was it
140 million or something?
Yeah, it was like
So it's been
96 million
released in
euros
China.
or yen. Yeah.
If it's being released in China, isn't it also being released in Taiwan?
But maybe Taiwan released a day earlier. I don't know. I don't know what the
around
release
the
dates
same
were.
time.
And the way international releases go, they don't all release at the same date.
So yeah, I mean, the point of my asking that was clearly he meant both, right? That it would be released by both. He wasn't making a political statement about Taiwan in that statement that he made. So it does then.
Where was he when he made this?
He was on a Taiwanese television station or something.
Yeah.
It was an interview with a media outlet there.
Yeah, it was a news station or something. But
Okay.
right, so he was speaking to Taiwanese people, and clearly he wasn't trying to make some, or at least seemingly clearly, he wasn't trying to make some political statement about it. And so the apology then seems heavy-handed in response. I listened to his apology, and he's very very sincere. He says very, very, but even that, for some people, is not enough. They say, no, you have to decry Taiwan as a country altogether, say that they are part of China, like specifically like this. And that does raise a concern for freedom of speech, even in America, where, like you said, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there, the almighty dollar, we're influenced so heavily in a capitalistic society by Chinese. I mean, look at all of our products that are made in China.
Made in China.
That's, there's very clearly
a Coke bottle. No, I'm kidding.
I bet you the clothes that we're wearing, some of them. And so, yeah, even if there isn't an overt control, sometimes that non-overt, what's the opposite of overt? Subverted, yeah. Subverted control, subversive control is even more controlling. I don't know.
Well, it goes back to that old Andrew Fletcher quote that I love to bring up. Let me write the songs of a nation. I care not who writes its laws. You're going to influence a society far more through the arts and influencing its culture than you are through express legalism and laws that are passed and try to be enforced by a police state or whatever. It's a much more subtle and a much more effective way of control. And so I do think that it's almost like we run the risk. It's like, okay, now don't get me wrong. I preach many times in the show that you do need to be empathetic and try to understand where someone else is coming from. Sure. And so I do want to listen. And that's why I think it's important to do the history work and understand what the background of this issue is and about why people in China find this so offensive. I do think that's one thing we need to do when we're responding to it. But I've also said equal number of times, you can be empathetic, you can try to understand, doesn't mean you have to agree.
Sure.
And at some point, while I agree that we should be empathetic to the Chinese people and them taking offense to this, at the same time, that doesn't necessarily mean that we can allow the fact that they're offended by it to completely dictate our actions. Because just like there's a moral responsibility now on us to try to see things from their perspective, I think there's equally a moral responsibility on their part to try to see things from our perspective, from John Cena's perspective.
Sure.
I'll be honest with you. I don't know if John Cena was trying to include China or everybody else in that or not. I just don't think he realized that Taiwan wasn't officially recognized as a country. I mean, honestly speaking, how many people watching this program, either now or live, knew before this story broke that about this whole dispute between China and Taiwan? Some of you probably did.
I didn't know about the depth until you sent me the article about the history of it. So,
and so I guarantee you, he gives, when you're on a press tour for a movie, you're going from outlet to outlet to outlet to outlet, and it's kind of like the stand-up comic who's like traveling around the country, and the first thing they say is like, "How you doing, Cleveland?" "Oh, we're in Miami." "Oh, sorry."
Right.
I mean, it's just he was talking to a Taiwanese outlet, so he mentioned Taiwan, and he just said, "You're one of the first countries to get to see it." You're right. It wasn't anything political. He's John Cena. He's an actor. I don't expect him to be tuned into all the political comings and goings of the world. And yet, if he doesn't walk the party line, so to speak, then frankly, his career would be in jeopardy. Because if you've got this major, this franchise that's so popular in China, and he does something to really affect the bottom line, then guess what? He's not going to be in the Fast and Furious franchise anymore.
Right. And I wonder if this speaks to one of the...
Can I just make a comment real quick? I'm sorry. I'm just finding it interesting. I assume the people who are sort of up in arms about him having to do this are most likely Americans.
Mostly, yeah.
Okay. So they don't like that the company that he works for is telling him what he should say and what his opinion should be. And yet, Disney should fire Gina for what she said.
Yeah.
And being able to say on her own personal platform, not a Disney platform, mind you, not even when she was promoting the show.
Yes, but, and this is just pure speculation on my part, this is speculation upon speculation upon speculation. I would wager a bet that most of the people who are most upset about John Cena saying this are also the people who don't think Gina Carano should have been fired.
Yeah.
That's, so...
what you mean that he shouldn't have had to...
Let's just put it this way. The Babylon Bee is one of the outlets that's been making fun of John Cena over this, okay? The Babylon Bee also did not think Gina Carano should have been fired,
Well, I agree, but there's probably some people out there who are upset that he's having to do this that didn't.
Quite possibly.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I wonder, too, so that brings up, obviously we did the story on Gina Carano when that came out. And that also ties a little bit to, I think, one of the stories from last week that we did with Belarus. And one of the threads in that story was this overstep of governments and party lines into other countries and their influence on other countries. Well, Belarus was outright in grounding the flight. But here in China, it's more subtle. But nonetheless, they're overreaching outside of their country's borders. I mean, yeah, they can affect the bottom line within their country. So it kind of muddies the water when you've got a NBC Universal, a organization or a filmmaking studio that has ties in different countries. Every country that they're producing films in kind of has a say in that, and so it does muddy the waters a bit as far as when things like this come up.
But you know,
who do you cater to?
Yeah, well, that's what it goes to show you. For people that think like NBC Universal, Disney, Fox, well, Fox is Disney now, Warner Brothers, if you think that these corporations have these strong moral values, and maybe they have moral values that you agree with, I got news for you. They don't have moral values. You know what? They're companies, okay? You know what their moral value is? What brings them money. So when a company like NBC Universal, and I'm bringing this up, I'm not going to go in here, we're not going to broach this topic, but let's just say there are a lot of companies that starting yesterday, June 1st, started changing logos and things like that. If you think for a minute that because they're doing that, that means that company's on our side. No, that company's on that side as long as they think it's going to help their bottom line. All right. If it wasn't going to help their bottom line, I mean, case in point, look 20 years ago when the politics on that particular issue were different. How many companies did you see coming out doing things like that?
How many companies are doing stuff like that the other 11 months of the year?
Right, exactly. Yeah. It's all economically driven, and the same thing here, And you don't believe me? This is like a proof positive, because no matter what John Cena said or didn't say, he was going to upset someone. And they made a deliberate choice to try to make the people in China happy, even though it was going to make the people in Taiwan unhappy. Why? Because China's where the money is.
Yep.
So welcome to our capitalistic society. The more you try to market your product to a worldwide audience, the more that, their different cultures and cultural expectations are going to come into play. But at what point do you draw the line and say, you know what? The dollar does not drive everything that we do.
You may even say that corporations share a similar motto to you guys, except for one word: do what's right, come what pays.
Ching. Yeah. I mean, that is what it is. All right, let's move on to our next story, shall we?
Sure thing.
All right, so our next story comes out of the Epic Times, is the one that I saw reporting on it, that you'd sent to us here, Ben. And it's there was a Marine Corps officer, and the article doesn't name, I don't believe, the Marine Corps officer who leaked it. But there was an Army training manual that was being shown to a group of which this Marine Corps officer was part. It was put out by the Department of Defense, and the purpose of the, or one purpose, I should say, of the training manual was part of this article is calling it a stand down that all military members in each of the branches are required to view. And the idea was to try to root out extremism and extremist ideologies within the armed forces. And so one of the slides that was in this presentation and trying to identify extremist ideologies within members of the armed forces listed a number of groups that were classified as extremists. All right. Well, some of the usual suspects: Al-Qaeda, Hamas, the KKK, Catholics, Evangelical Christians. Which one of these is not like the others? I mean, two of these, actually.
Two, yeah.
So, I mean, and that was what the attention grabbing was, is this whole list of these extreme groups. The Department of Defense put out by, let's see.
I'm an extremist.
You're an extremist. The Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, kind of explained this and said that, this is part of a stand down to identify and root out extremists in the U.S. military in the wake of the January 6th breach of the U.S. Capitol, in which some of the participants were military veterans. And so because some of the participants were military veterans, that's in turn supposedly causing concern that there is extremism within the ranks of the military. We need to root out the extremism within the ranks of the military, which means we need to find out which members are members of Al-Qaeda or Hamas or the KKK or the Roman Catholic Church or pretty much any evangelical Christian out there. That's the story in a nutshell. I mean,
yeah, and so they say something down. I forget who. Austin said in the DVD.
Oh no, he's when he rubs his brow, it's like you putting your arms
He's about to say
across
something
and leaning
profound.
back.
No, well, I wish I had wrote it down actually, but effectively, what we're seeing here, we've got a ideology police, and where is that?
Oh no, the president isn't a religious extremist.
Well, seriously,
He is.
Bi-
Biden is Roman Catholic.
And so is Pelosi.
yeah. How many people does this blanket?
The poor Pope.
We lay out a blanket statement as extremists, and so what you have here, it's the old adage, when you make, and it's not exactly the same, so maybe I'm butchering it, but when you make everything sacred, nothing is, or when you make everything extreme, nothing is, kind of a thing. So how many people are blanketed in this, who claim to be Catholic or evangelical, and we can get down that road, whether they're truly practicing believers or not. And what we see is such a watering down of this idea of, and this kind of goes into one of the other stories that we'll talk about too, is bowing down to the idol of tolerance, but yet only when it is convenient for people.
Right.
And so we see this subversion in culture of the exception has to invalidate the norm, right? So the exception of maybe some of these people hold extreme views, does that invalidate everybody else in there? Or even at a broader, in a broader scope in our culture, where there's such a push for inclusion and tolerance for certain approved victims, approved victimhood, that invalidates that everyone has to cater to that. Again, goes back to this idea of catering to the victim. Maybe I'm getting off on a tangent with that, but yeah,
I think the term you're looking for is squirrel.
yeah, I'm getting on it, squirrel. But I just wonder how much thought went into putting it into something like this, like how much research went into this.
Okay, explain to me again, how did we find out about this? This was leaked?
Whistleblower, a
Yeah.
Marine officer who saw it, who was part of the training, took a screenshot and
Let it out there.
Let it out there, yeah, basically.
And how long ago did this letting it out there
This
happen?
was March 24th was the briefing.
Yeah.
Um,
There was a briefing in the House Armed Services Committee about this.
Okay.
So I don't know how far before that was the actual.
Sometime between January
Training.
6th, because it mentions those from the
Right.
January
Yeah.
6th attack. Between January 6th and March 24th is when this happened.
Right.
Because the premise was some of these
Veterans were
veterans
Catholics
were
or-
at the Capitol on the 6th, and so some of these veterans, and the
and are
correlation is that they were evangelicals or Catholics.
Catholics.
And so that
but not any
makes them-
other.
but no other correlation, I guess, to extremism.
Yeah.
Um,
And Ryan Iwanowski here says basically patriotism is now considered extremist, it would seem. There's a what? Oh, and Cool Husband says it's not just military. Government employees had similar training where Christians were listed as extremist. When we had a Q&A and asked why wasn't Black Lives Matters or Antifa listed, you could hear crickets. Let me kind of draw a parallel that might make everybody upset, but that's the fun part of the show. So here's my problem with the whole reasoning. It's a frankly well-documented phenomenon that people are willing to excuse in themselves, or people they favor behavior or reasoning that they would not excuse in others. Sure. People aren't consistent in their reasoning. One of there are many conservative commentators in relation to the issue of whether you want to call it illegal immigration, undocumented immigrants. That's bringing all sides in what their chosen rhetoric here. One of the leading responses that I've seen on the conservative side of that is, people will cite violence, that, criminal acts that are perpetrated by people who are not here in the country legally, who that could have been avoided if the people weren't in here. And I was just watching a video the other day where somebody was responding to this person saying, when you make statements like that, well, of course, this is under the whole argument about, language could be acts of violence. We've talked about that before on the show. I'm not going to go into that. That's ridiculous. But the argument was essentially that you're fostering an environment where you're contributing to racist actions because you're by saying these making these comments about this certain class of people, this certain race of people, whatever you want to refer to them as, then people are going to take that and expand it and call it to the entire group, so to speak. All right. If you buy that reasoning, you probably see where I'm going with this already.
Exception invalidates the norm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If that's your argument in that case, then I sure hope that you're standing on the same soapbox and condemning this, because even if we assume that some portion of the people who were there on January 6th were evangelical Christians, Roman Catholics, whatever, by putting them, just because there were a few of them, now we're going to put the entire category of people on this list of extreme ideologies. That there's a logical inconsistency there.
Absolutely.
We do have Tim Foster here says, are you guys surprised?
No.
If the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. John 15:18.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, and the other thing to point out.
Oh wait, oops, not read in Lutheran churches.
Yeah, no, and it's not surprising. And
I beg to differ. We are currently located inside a Lutheran church, and we just read it.
That's funny. Yeah, it's not surprising. And another point to make here is actually Representative Mike Rogers here says that, he's the panel's top Republican. He told the hearing at the outset that, quote, it is important to point out that we lack any concrete evidence that violent extremism is as rife in the military as some commentators claim. So the entire premise of this presentation at the DOD was rooting out violent extremism in the military. And here, at least one representative is saying there's no concrete evidence for that. So what's the premise here? I know it was in response to the January 6th, what happened on the 6th, but I think it's almost reactionary. And we've talked about this on this show before, that too often, even in our government, people do things that are reactionary and very short-sighted. And so this seems to me to fall into that category of just labeling all Catholics and evangelicals as extremists is very short-sighted and doesn't demonstrate very much thought that went into, well, and it's inconsistent, just like you're saying.
Hey, Ben, you know something? Did you know that some of the people who raided the Capitol on January 6th had brown hair? Therefore, people with brown hair are extremists.
Right?
Correlation.
It's good.
Does not equal
It's a good
causation.
thing my hair's going gray, because then I'd be doubly
Well,
in
that's
trouble.
my point, is that, and one of the points was made by one of these articles, is like, just because you can find some category to which some of those people belonged doesn't mean there is a causal connection between their actions and that category. The exact same reasoning that's employed here to put Roman Catholics and evangelical Christians on this list would be equally applied to people with brown hair, unless you can take the further step and show what it is about their Roman Catholic ideology or their evangelical Christian ideology that led to this. And that's the problem, because you look at the other groups on this list, Hamas, Al-Qaeda, the KKK, guess what all those groups have in common? All those groups openly advocate acts of violence, okay? What does Roman Catholicism and evangelical Christianity, what do they not advocate? Acts of violence.
Right.
I mean, and so it's like there's a logical disconnect. The ideology does not lead to the behavior. Does that mean that humans don't sometimes twist that ideology to engage in this type of behavior? Sure they do, because we're all fallen, sinful human beings. And that's why I always tell people, you want to evaluate Christianity, don't do it on the basis of a Christian, do it on the basis of Christ. Because that's the standard which defines what Christianity is Jesus Christ himself. And that ideology does not advocate for this type of action, and that's the huge distinguishing factor between them.
Yeah, absolutely. And we don't like using this term, but I want to play devil's advocate for a second. Is just trying to, maybe now they're going to accuse me of being wishy-washy. I'm not advocating for this position. I'm trying to see it from the other side. How would you respond to somebody who says, okay, the correlation between what happened at the storming of the Capitol and evangelicals, and somebody who points to one of those articles that we just talked about in a previous episode of statistically the white evangelicals are more prone to support like the QAnon theories and things like that, and there's that correlation that people are going to point to and say
Can
that
I take this?
causation.
Correlation does not mean causation.
Right. So the argument that I can see people forming is that because they're more prone to support this kind of ideology, Catholics and evangelicals are more prone to support this ideology, then this ideology leads to violence. And that's, I think, what's behind this is a lot of those,
Well, and in response, there's a couple of things I'd say. Number one, well, as Mary Kay's pointed out here, correlation does not necessarily equal causation. Now, it is possible that you may not have a direct causation, but there might be a third relationship. Like, one belief may cause another belief, which in turn causes this action. And so it could be an indirect route to it. That is entirely possible. But number one, that's where we get to, the ideology is defined by Christ, not by the fallen followers. And if you want to create that standard for, Christian ideology, then you have to apply that equally to other ideologies. And we have to talk about, well, in that situation, then what about the gentleman who went to the softball game of all the Republican, but the senators or House representatives, congressmen, I can't remember, and shot up the place? Does that mean that liberal ideology, liberal political ideology is going to, put people at a higher risk to go shoot up a softball game of their political opponents? So you've got to apply it consistently. But the other thing that I would say, just as a pure factual matter, is just saying that this group is more likely than other groups to believe such and such does not mean that belief is in any way common within that group. Right. I mean, let's say that I have, for example...
No, okay, let's just make this... Yeah, but let's just make this clear. Okay, somebody noticed... that every day that the pool was open, that people bought more ice cream. So they started assuming that as long as the pool was open, people would buy more ice cream. That's not the truth. The pool is open because it's warm outside. People are buying more ice cream because it's warm outside. They're correlated. Pool being open, people buying ice cream, but neither one of them is caused by the other. There's a third factor that's out there that's leading to each of those things happening. So it's still saying that correlation is not causation. It still, in my mind, is the cement for that, because I'm sorry, there could be some third thing going on out there that's causing both situations to happen. Both this person to be Catholic or evangelical and this person to have these more violent tendencies. Their parent, who was Catholic, raised them and was a very strict parent. Well, but it doesn't mean that every parent that is Catholic...
I think we said before, people aren't two-dimensional.
No. And my point is the case is even weaker than that. Because even if I say that, such and such group is more likely to believe X than other group. Group A is more likely to believe X than Group B, all right? Well, if I were to tell you that 2% of people in Group A believe X and 1% of people in Group B believe X, well, then okay, the people in Group A are more likely to believe X than people in Group B, but still 98% of people in Group A don't believe X.
Still a fringe, and so that goes, again, that's the exception then invalidating the norm.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's why it's not a good argument, but it is the type of thing that people generally, they don't think through their beliefs. They just don't. And they believe what they're told to believe, what they want to believe is true. And so they just repeat these things. But
yeah.
All right. So let's move on, shall we?
Sure.
Story number 3.
All right.
If you weren't outraged enough, let's get another one. We do have a feel-good story at the end, Mary Kay.
We saved it to the end. All right. So this one comes from Yahoo News. Actually, there's several. Actually, it's Fox News through Yahoo because I see the Fox News logo. But anyway, it's reported several places. A valedictorian, a high school valedictorian in John Glenn High School in Michigan, submitted a draft for her speech that she was going to give at an honors night. And in the speech, she made some comments criticizing other philosophies. And one of the things that she said in her speech was that the purpose of life is to live a life devoted to Christ. So it was Christian language. She made no bones about her faith and was encouraging people that the purpose of life, to have a life of fulfillment, was to devote yourself to Christ. Well, so she had to submit a draft of her speech to the high school principal, who then reviewed it and sent a letter in response, and basically saying that she couldn't say that because it violated, in the principal's mind, it violated freedom of speech because you had to be inclusive to many people. Let's see. The principal Weger said that diversity, quote, goes well beyond race and ethnicity. It certainly would include religious beliefs as well. We have students and staff who would identify as Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindi, Sikh, Jehovah's Witness, atheist, etc. We must be inclusive and respectful of their beliefs as well, end quote. So he said that she needed to revise that, to take that part out about Christianity. And so she then, in response, contacted First Liberty, which is a organization, for freedom of speech, advocates for that. They are a nationwide nonprofit law firm dedicated to defending religious liberty. And so they sent a letter in response back to this principal, basically citing a common misconception that so often, we've seen this before, it's not really anything surprising, but so often in the past, institutions like high schools and other public institutions kind of conflate freedom of speech and somebody like a third party, like a valedictorian, speaking on behalf of the school, that they conflate the person's personal beliefs with the school's official narrative, basically the school's official, that they're speaking for the school. So the whole letter that was sent in response basically outlined that no, as a third party, she's allowed to have her own freedom of speech, and so they recommended that the principal allow her to keep that language, that the purpose of to have a fulfilling life is to devote yourself to Christ, in her speech. So there's a lot of legal
Legal mumbo jumbo
angles we can take on this. So what's your perspective?
Well, first thing I noticed, and maybe we'll have to do a follow-up. I don't know if you saw or not, but I think they're scheduled to have a follow-up meeting, I think today on this. So I don't know if anything else happened as a result of this today, with the school, that is. First, again, let's, have the full picture and the accurate picture. Number one, understand that the United States Supreme Court, to my knowledge, and I believe this is correct, has not issued a ruling specifically addressing the question of a student giving a valedictorian speech.
Right.
All right. Now, understand the general principle is, like, if you're an agent of the school, a teacher, for example, an administrator, all right, you can't give up and give a sermon at a school event. All right. You're considered a government agent. You speak on behalf of the government. Separation of church and state. I'm not going to open that whole ball of wax, but basically the government is not allowed to endorse a particular religion. So someone who's acting on behalf of the government cannot get up in their official capacity and endorse a particular religion. A student who's attending school has the right to express their religious beliefs, however. If they want to start a prayer group, they can start a prayer group. If they want to, pray before, bring their Bible to school, they want to pray before, before they eat their meals. They want to have a prayer group in the hallway. As long as they're not obstructing the educational process, they're allowed to do that. There's been cases, for example, where a student group wanted to start a Christian newsletter, and the school said, no, you can't do that. And the Supreme Court there said, yes, they can. Yes, it's going to be put out by the school, but it's put out by this group of the school. But there's still students that are doing it, students that are editing it, and they're entitled to express themselves, and you can't stop them from doing that. That's just one of many cases that have come out.
The See You at the Poll is a perfect example. That's student led. They're allowed to do that.
And so for all of these reasons, the U.S. Department of Education has put out guidance that basically tries to answer this question and says, hey, look, based upon all of these cases the Supreme Court has decided, we think it's pretty clear that just because a student is giving a valedictorian speech at graduation does not make that student an agent of the school.
Right.
They're still entitled to their own religious beliefs, and they can express them. And frankly, the answer to the school is, you don't want students to have the freedom to do that, then you don't have to let a valedictorian give a speech. I mean, that's the option for the school. Now, nobody wants to go down that route. But if you're going to let a student speak, then you got to let the students speak, is what the Department of Education has said. Now, I do want to read.
Okay, what keeps them from allowing the student to use foul language?
That's not constitutionally protected.
Protected speech, yeah.
Yeah, there's first of all, free speech in a school environment is not the same as free speech is in the public square. For example, you can go into the public square and use foul language, whereas a school is allowed some limitations to help maintain the orderly processing of the school environment. But what they can't do is that's a manner of speech question. They can't regulate the content, especially when we have a freedom of religion. They cannot regulate, say, well, you can't talk about this religion or you can't talk about your religious beliefs. That they can't do because that's really getting to the content of the message as opposed to the manner of delivering it. So here's what she actually said. I did want to read what she actually said because a lot of times what happens in these articles, you get these little snippets and we try to form opinions based on the snippets. This is the portion of the speech, that the relevant portion, and it was quoted in the letter that First Liberty sent to the school. Excuse me. She says, "So what is the goal for our future generation? It ultimately reflects the purpose of life. What is our purpose? The philosopher Plato says that our purpose is to obtain the highest end of knowledge. Charles Darwin claims that it is to be the most fit for survival. Various religions claim that it is to be a good person. In reflecting on this question, I read a book entitled Don't Waste Your Life. In it, Reverend Piper recalled a story of an old man weeping. Oh, how I've wasted it. The man's remorse is a reflection of his past. He recognizes the folly that his life had become. This is why, students, I want to urge you not to waste your life. Seek the truth. But how is this possible? I'd argue that the philosophies listed above are wrong. The purpose of life is to live a life devoted to Christ. Westminster Catechism number 1, quote, the chief purpose for which man is made is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever, end quote. So what the school ended up telling her was, because they had a follow-up telephone conversation, and they said, all that stuff where you're talking about, Charles Darwin and Plato, that's okay. We can talk about what they thought about the purpose of life. But that part where you think, you talk about what the Christian thinks of as the purpose of life, that you agree with that one, no, that's very Christianized, and that part needs to come out. And that's where it gets to be a content-based restriction. And I'll be honest, if the valedictorian was one of these other worldviews,
they wanted all these views to be
equally represented.
But the Christian view is the one that has to be
because she said she agrees with it.
Exactly.
That's the key.
Yeah.
She didn't just say, and Christians say this. She said, and I think the Christian view has it right.
Yeah.
That's where you draw the line, but that's where it becomes an unconstitutional abridgment of her freedom of speech. And understand, let's be consistent. If the valedictorian was a Buddhist and they wanted to get up there and espouse their Buddhist philosophy, under our legal system, they have the right to do that. And as Christians, we should, if we're going to say that we have the right to, we should admit that legally they have the right to as well. It just seems that these cases are more and more coming up in the Christian context, I guess.
Right. Yeah, because that's...
I just find it funny because I remember having a conversation with somebody, funny, I mean ironic funny, but I remember having a conversation with somebody, it was within the last 10 years or so, but I said that Christians were becoming more and more frequently persecuted in America, where we always thought that Christian persecution only happened in, Muslim states and overseas where, like a political party is in control of a country, and may or may not want the Christian viewpoint out there. But, I said it's happening, and I got laughed at. Like, that's not, you don't know what persecution is. I'm like, you're right, I don't yet, but I probably will in the next few years.
And this is, that scripture that Tim just shared is also applicable to this story.
If the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you. John 15:18. There it's been said a second time in a Lutheran church.
There you go. Yeah, John 15:18. So
did I say 18? Did I misspeak? Did I say 15:16? No, I'm thinking I said 15:18. Okay,
I think you did. Yeah. So
if not, I'll blame
back later. But I mean, clearly there's something about the Christian message that is an offense, and we as Christians should not be shocked by this, because clearly Jesus said it would the world has hated him first, so clearly we shouldn't expect any different. No student is greater than their master, or student greater than their teacher. If the world has hated him, then it will hate us as well. So as Christians, I think, we take this in stride, take it with grace, but we don't have to just lay down like doormats either, Right. We do have avenues, as long as we're still a free country, then we have avenues that
air quotes,
that we can pursue, and I think we should.
You know what I found very illustrative of what you guys are talking about is if you look at, and I don't know if you got to read the article that actually quoted also the principal's email back to this lady. The first paragraph lays out his legal presentation, which he was wrong about, I think, but at least it could be genuine, that he thought that when she was making a valedictorian speech that she was speaking as an agent of the school, and therefore First Amendment says that they can't do that, they can't allow it. That's kind of what he said in his first paragraph. Mm-hmm. Then he opens up his second paragraph. He says, I would also like to give the following advice from a more social perspective. Why? Stop right there. You said if what she's allowed, if your only objection is that she's not legally allowed to say this, then that's really the only ground you would have for stopping her. Don't give her your social advice.
Yeah.
And that's where all that stuff comes into. But look at what a diverse school we are, which diversity is great. I got no problem with that. But we need to make sure that all of these views are equally represented in her speech. No, she doesn't. I'm sorry. It's not her responsibility to go through. It is her moral responsibility to be empathetic and kind and polite and respectful. It's not her obligation to give a speech that is giving equal time to everyone's viewpoint. Right. They're not the ones giving the speech. She is.
Exactly. And that, again, it's that pressure, that societal pressure that we see to bow to the idol of tolerance.
Yeah. And so I don't
all
get.
That says is, that's all that quote says to me. Like, you have to understand, we have a very diverse cultural makeup in our school, and so we have to be tolerant. That's really all it is.
I mean, really, I think also from a legal perspective, that really hurts his case. Because if your defense here is, well, legally we don't think she's allowed to say this, then why even have that second paragraph? I mean, that second paragraph completely betrays your motivations in this. And I'd be asking this guy, well, why did you feel that it was your place to give her your social advice? Your worldview advice about what is a good idea and what's not a good idea. Is that really how you are now editing these valedictorian speeches, not just on what you think is legally permitted, but what you personally think is socially permitted as well?
Which is irrelevant, legally speaking.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, within the boundaries we talked about before, a school is allowed to make sure that a student doesn't go up there and use curse words throughout their speech and things like that, or incite violence or things like that. There are boundaries, but viewpoint discrimination on a religious ground is not one of them.
Right.
So, all right. Shall we move on to our last story of the evening?
Yeah, let's have a happy story.
We'll have a happy story. Convince my wife that, okay, Ben picked it out. I got to give him credit. I had nothing to do with this. So there's an organization in Kenya called the Atheists in Kenya. And it's a relatively new organization. I think it was founded in 2016. Yeah, it was established in 2016, so it's been around for about 5 years. But there was a gentleman named Seth Mahiga, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, who was the secretary for the past year and a half. He was the secretary of this group, Atheists in Kenya. Well, there's a video out there now. Was it on Twitter? I can't remember where it was shown. I think it was on Twitter. That shows this gentleman in a church there in Kenya, and he has now accepted Christ. And as a result, needs to say, he has resigned from his position as the secretary of Atheists in Kenya, this group. Christianity, and here's a statement about, we talk about how Christianity is on the decline in the West. 85% of the population of Kenya identifies themselves as being Christian. So I thought that's nothing I didn't really know about, although maybe not to that extent. But
so 85% of Kenyans are radical.
Sorry. Going back to the story, yes, they're radical extremists. Now the society, the Atheists in Kenya Society, they actually posted the video on their own Twitter page. and describing his conversion as, quote, surreal. And they said, they did issue a statement later on. They said Seth's reason for resigning is that he has found Jesus Christ and is no longer interested in promoting atheism in Kenya. We wish Seth all the best in his newfound relationship with Jesus Christ. We thank him for having served the society with dedication over the last 1.5 years. My voice is going out on me here big time tonight. It's always so hot and humid in here. Which I did find, I mean, great. That was a very gracious statement, I thought, on their part. I do find it interesting, you know, how you're wishing him all the best in his newfound relationship with someone you don't think, at least the way he's understanding him, exists. I mean, as far as the atheists are concerned, Jesus was a man who lived thousands of years ago and is now dead. Right. So how's he having a relationship with him? But it was their attempt to be gracious. I just find it a little bit puzzling the way they worded it. But anyway.
And yeah, you can never tell like tone, inflection over text. So maybe it was a tongue-in-cheek kind of a thing. But to me, I mean, no, it comes across as gracious. And that's what struck me most about this was their response. Here, a group of atheists are saying, well, we wish you the best. We thank you for your dedication. And that almost to me, like, and look, I don't want this to be the case, but imagine if the shoes were reversed and, you know, a Christian, how many times we see Christians, we talk about it on this show, ex-evangelicals, Christians moving to the atheist camp, and we can get into whether or not we should be or not, but at least in response, how many times are Christians as gracious as this atheist group is, or from an, I guess, as understanding? We would do well, I think, to at least hear people out and be understanding, not to say that we have to agree with them, just like you said earlier. But yeah, I think it was kind of telling that, I don't know, it was just kind of, it struck me, the atheist group response. Now, clearly, so there is a cultural difference too then in Kenya, with 85% of Kenyans professing believers, and we see kind of, I think the reverse is almost true here in America, that certainly not 85% of Christians. We're closer to the 50. We're below 50%. We're at 40%.
Yeah, we have more than 15% of people identifying as Christian here. Yeah. But the question is how many of those can even identify a most basic Christian belief. That's a different question. But
yeah, that's true too. But no, I think it is. Well, it's always a good day when we can add one more to the kingdom. You know, when God adds one more to the kingdom. And
I lost another one.
That's right.
I am free. I'm not going to sing my voice like this. This is not good.
But no, and I think that also speaks to maybe you know, we have to ask ourselves the question of why. Why is it on the rise in these other countries, and why is it on the decline in the U.S.? You know, and what can we do about that?
Well, I think your point about the response and the way they responded, and wondering what would happen if the shoe was on the other foot, is intriguing. And it brings me back to 1 Peter 3:15. You know, and this is speaking to 1 Peter 3:15 addresses how we're supposed to behave when we're speaking to non-believers. You know, always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. All right, we get that. At least most people I talk to, you know, we hear that verse and we think, oh, okay, so if I'm confronting someone who is not currently a believer and I'm meeting them for the first time and I'm talking to them about my faith, I'm supposed to treat them with gentleness and respect. Okay, I get that. We're good. But understand that people that at least profess to be believers and now no longer are, your ex-evangelical, so to speak, they fall under that category too.
Yeah.
You know, and you're still supposed to be treating them with gentleness and respect. But it gets to the fact that I think we almost feel like we have more of a personal investment and a personal sense of loss. And almost, and this is getting back to our capitalistic society here, we have this us versus them mentality. It's our team versus their team. And you know, just like you don't like it when the ref calls a penalty on your team or the other team scores a touchdown on your team, you know, you get angry about that. We get angry when we feel like our team has lost someone. And we almost we just want to blame them. And to a certain extent, I get that. We're all our own individuals. I'm not going to get into decision theology now. We're not going there. But at the same time, regardless of what the reasons are for why they're now disclaiming the faith, we should still be presenting them the gospel with gentleness and respect.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, well, even the Bible talks about, it's God's kindness that leads us to repentance. God, and sometimes we take this to the extreme. We misuse the grace of God. We shouldn't take that as license for sin. But God is gracious. He's not slow, as some consider slowness, but he is patient with us, not desiring that any should perish, but all should come to repentance. And so we should exhibit the same. If we are Christian, if we are little Christ, if we are Christ followers, we should exhibit that same patience with people and understanding and drawing them back where possible, but understanding that that's the job of the Holy Spirit to work within them.
So just out of curiosity, why did you guys pick this story to talk about?
Well, because he wanted to do it.
I thought it was intriguing. I think
Because somebody guilted us into having a positive story last week.
no, I think it is.
You guys depress me sometimes.
I think it's intriguing. It's always something that we'd like to. We talk so much. It feels like we talk so much about people who have left the faith or things that are wrong with Christianity. That here we see somebody who's joined the faith, who was in a very the camp of atheism and not believing. They've come to the side of, or here we're going to talk about the side of belief. They've come to believe. They found their faith in Jesus Christ, and so that's always something to be celebrated. So that's certainly one reason that we wanted to, or I would like to share this story. But I thought it intriguing too, that other angle of how the society responded. I don't know, kind of got me thinking.
There's a lesson there in that, and I do like doing stories like this because otherwise we as Christians should look different from the world. And you look at any news broadcast, and what are always the top stories that you always hear about all the time? It's all the disasters, all the stuff that gets people angry, and frankly nowadays the stuff that divides us. And yeah, we've talked about persecution and things like that, and there's a lot of stuff going on in the world today that does alarm and should alarm Christians, but there's also some positive things as well, and so I do think it's worthy lifting up. And if the video was great too. I don't know if you got to see. The other thing the video made me think of is, it's only like a 30-second video, so you don't see too much of it, but just the worship style, which God was definitely being lifted up there in that environment. And I think lots of times, especially here in the United States, sometimes we also divide ourselves up into teams based upon our worship styles and preferences. Like, no, this way is the only way to do it, or that way is the way to do it, or that's the best way to do it. And some of it's innocent. I think sometimes we tend to live in this kind of the sheltered existence where we tend to think like everybody, all real churches must worship like we do. Just from a tech standpoint, I just saw somebody who I admire greatly, is from his tech standpoint, say on one of his videos that, all modern churches are really going the direction of, having their worship services with the putting the lights down and having the dimmer light set up. And I'm just like, no, that's just not true. There is a certain segment of the church that, yes, that is doing that. A lot of your non-denominational churches are doing that. Some of your newer Baptist churches are doing that. But, a lot of your mainline denominations, you're not going to find a lot of Lutheran churches that do that. Right. And you're not going to find a lot of Catholic churches that do that, although there are some. I know one down in Baltimore that does that. You're not going to find, I'm not going to mention that denomination that still has wounds for me, but no. The point is that we all tend to think that this is the right way to do it, and we lose track of the fact that the gospel message doesn't change, but the method can be. Even Paul, Acts chapter 17, where he goes to Berea and he goes to Thessalonica, and there he goes into the synagogues.
Areopagus too.
Well, I'm getting to the Areopagus.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
But first he goes to Thessalonica and Berea. Yeah. And when he goes to those two cities, he goes into Jewish synagogue. And so what does he do? He reasons with them from the scriptures. Why? Because they're Jewish. They understand the scriptures and they recognize the authority of the scriptures. So he doesn't need to waste time with them establishing, for example, these scriptures are God's word. They already believe that. So he's going to start from where they are and then get them to Jesus from there. But then he goes to Athens and he's talking to the Areopagus, and now he's talking to a bunch of Stoic philosophers. He doesn't pull out the Jewish scriptures and start saying, well, look what this scripture says, because they don't accept the authority of the scriptures. Right. Instead, he takes where they're at and he says, hey, by the way, I noticed you have this altar to an unknown God. let me tell you about that God you don't know about, you know? And by the way, he's the one true God. And so he uses where they're at. So the gospel message he was preaching was the same in all three cities, but the approach he took to deliver it varied based upon the cultural context he found himself in. And I think when I watched that video, that's another one. It was one of those hit home moments. I was like, look, here's the gospel message being proclaimed in a worship method that's very different from what I'm used to, but that doesn't make it any less legitimate.
Exactly.
Right?
You know, I remember having a conversation with a family member, and I won't name names, but this person is not Christian. And
It's not me. Good.
no, but they were mentioning how they had read somewhere that the Gospel of Luke was written specifically for to Gentiles and not Jewish people. And I remember saying, okay, so, and she's made it sound like it was almost, I don't know, sort of disingenuous to do that. Like they were, like they're making this pitch, to believe in something, and specifically catering it to their audience. And I'm like, okay, so still, what's wrong with that? And I said, okay, so I said, let's just talk about, if they're sincerely just trying to teach the Gentiles about Jesus, okay, versus trying to teach a Jewish person about Jesus. Okay. I teach people things in math all the time. I'm going to teach somebody who does not have a background in math, a topic in a different way to somebody who I know what they've already learned. So if I get my own student in my classroom, I know what material I've already presented all year long. So I'm going to present new material to them in a way that assumes they've learned everything I've said to them so far. Okay. It is a little bit of an assumption because some of them aren't going to keep all that in their heads. But, whereas if you put a new student in front of me to tutor and help them, and they pull out a problem and they say, I don't know how to do this problem, I'm going to be like, what do you already know? I'm going to approach it in an entirely different way. So I said this to her, I'm like, why is this such an issue? They didn't grow up with the scriptures, so you're not going to see Luke quoting a lot of scriptures like Matthew does. Why is this a problem?
Right.
And
meet people where they are.
Yeah, but she was like almost offended on behalf of Gentiles everywhere because somebody was specifically trying to pitch.
And scripturally speaking, Paul recognizes this in scripture. He says, Jews look for a sign, Greeks search for wisdom, right? So that's two different approaches to the truth, right? We're all getting at the truth. Jews recognize the authority of signs because that validates that God is in that, because if it's a sign, then it comes from God. And so that's the Jewish approach to it. Greeks or Gentiles, by extension, look for wisdom because by the Stoic philosophers, remember that's the ideology there, that's how you approach truth. And so Jesus is the truth. And if you're trying, now again, I don't want to go to all paths lead to God kind of a deal. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is Paul did it. That's the model that we have scripturally of meeting people where they are and understanding that none of us exist in a cultural vacuum. We're all products. We all come to life with our own worldview, our own zeitgeist, we have presuppositions. It's impossible not to have presuppositions. And so as much as we can understand that and meet other people where they are with their presuppositions and get them to an understanding of the truth, I think that's where God comes in.
And I don't think there's any problem with, certain worship styles, work better for you individually than other worship styles, as long as we don't try to make that necessarily a required norm.
And don't exalt the personal experience over the glorification of God.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'll go on the record as long as we're going down this path. I didn't think we were going to. It came to me as we were sitting here talking about this, but let's just go ahead and get myself in trouble. I'll call it out. I mean, if you're someone who believes that, and I will go vice versa on this, who believes that traditional worship is true worship and contemporary is all garbage, I disagree with you. If you believe the contemporary worship is the only way to go and traditional is boring and is driving everybody away from Christ, I disagree with you. If you don't like all the contemporary music and you think we need to go back to all traditional hymns, I just remind you, if you want to follow that philosophy, we should all go back to Gregorian chants and even before that, because at some point, even what we consider traditional hymns right now were brand new and they were contemporary.
Have you seen the biblical characters Facebook pages? So you've got like, there's a profile for David, and he says, all true worship must be done with a harp and a lyre, and like kind of parodying some of the arguments we have in Christendom.
Now, I will say that I do think that we need to try to make sure that we're truly worshiping and that we're not slipping into entertainment. It's not a concert, and that the content of what we're singing and doing is biblically sound. And so I agree with all that. Where I disagree is, people that try to paint with a broad brush and say all contemporary worship, for example, is it's just a concert. It's not raising God up. It's not lifting God up. Or all contemporary music doesn't. No contemporary music has the theological depth and content. I disagree with you. It does, and we shouldn't be painting with a broad brush. We should be discerning. But we should. I got news for you. There's some traditional hymns that have some bad theology in them as well, and we should be discerning of that as well.
It's one of our more viewed episodes when we were talking about the worship styles and Hillsong. As one of the
we did talk about that,
a little bit about the discernment. Though.
Didn't somebody accuse us of being like overly judgmental?
Yeah, I think that was.
Somebody said something along the lines of you shouldn't be judging other churches, and I'm like, okay, then why are you commenting and judging us? Judging people from other churches, like you mean like you just did. But anyway, that's right. So I do remember that. Yeah, that was not that long ago either. Well, actually, probably was now. Probably was like
at
a year
this point,
ago.
Yeah, at least a year.
Anyway, so there's my soapbox. I'm down. I didn't expect to go there with this last story, but it's something I do feel pretty strongly about because I think it's something that causes unnecessary division within the body of Christ. I guarantee you've all got people in your family, some of whom like Mass Singer, some who don't like Mass Singer, and you can still be part of the same family. I love you, honey. We can all, as long as we all are unified around that gospel message, we can have differences of preferences or whatever in the what's it you call the we had this when I gave that Augustine quote, you had the accidents or the surface level stuff. I can't remember what we called it. You had a really good term.
Oh, like the adiaphora, the peripheral.
The peripheral stuff. Was it adiaphora? I don't remember. Maybe it was.
I forget.
We get differences of preferences and opinions about that, about how we're expressing that, as long as the central core stays the same. Yeah. And we need to stop dividing ourselves over that. So.
Yeah, I think we all can get behind a story that says somebody came to Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Woohoo! Yeah.
So at least we should be able to get behind that.
Atheists didn't like it. No. I mean, they didn't like it, but that's, right. Yeah, that's not the point. We want to be gracious because we want to, I mean, if anything, it's an opportunity for, maybe other people. If we handle things like this correctly, it's an opportunity for other people in the atheist group to ask themselves, why did he do that? Here's this guy that I was working alongside of for a year and a half. What is that led him to do that? And if we're inviting enough, then Holy Spirit can move there. Let's let the Holy Spirit do its work and not get in his way.
Right.
So. It didn't say.
I didn't give his reason.
As far as why? No, he just said he'd been experiencing difficulties in his life prior to his resignation, but it didn't really identify what they were. And like I said, it was a 30-second video, so there's not a whole lot to go on.
Yeah, it's kind of brief.
So, all right. I think we're good. It's 7:02. We're not too, considering we got off to a late start. And again, we apologize for the technical difficulties. We blame YouTube.
Wait.
Why not?
No.
I mean, no, I'm gonna blame YouTube. I mean, hey, they didn't. If YouTube didn't cut us off the air after what was it, last week's episode?
Oh, right, yeah.
When we were bashing YouTube, then I don't think me blaming them for our technical difficulties at the beginning of the show is going to do.
Next week's episode, we'll have a apology a la John Cena. YouTube, we are very sorry.
We love you, YouTube.
If you didn't get that, go back to the beginning of the show and get the reference.
Actually, I do have a bone to pick, speaking of the almighty dollar with YouTube, and I got to figure this out. And if anybody out there knows the answer to this, you want to put it in the comments section, let me know. Because, we're monetized, and we're getting ready to actually get our first check from YouTube. We're supposed to, so yay us. But the way they do it is you have to create what's called an AdSense account, which is a separate account, but it's all tied into your YouTube account in order to set up your payment preferences and all that. Well, they send you a PIN number in the mail that you have to then use to activate your AdSense account. And I did all this like a month ago, and it said something along the lines of give us it'll take some period of time to verify it and blah, 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 whatever. I went and tried to log in today to the AdSense account, and it's not letting me. It's saying we don't have an AdSense account. YouTube still says I have an AdSense account, but AdSense doesn't say we have an AdSense account. And so I'm wondering, conspiracy theory, it maybe YouTube didn't cut us off. They just surreptitiously talked to AdSense and said, take away their account so they can't make any money. I don't know. I'm just going out on a limb here. So now I'm going to get cut off. No, that's something we got to work out because, we're supposed to have that. I don't know why it got cut off. So if anybody has any explanation about why AdSense could be saying we don't have an account, even after we went in and verified it with a PIN number, I'd appreciate your insight. So that's it. People are tuning out now, I think, left and right, because we're not interesting anymore. So that's it. We'll sign off. We're here every Wednesday at 5:30. Please join us for next week for another stimulating round of conversation. Thank you, Mary Kay, for being a wonderful producer as always. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Ken.
And I decided not to cut you off this time because you've started saying thank you, Ken. And
thank you, Mary Kay.
But most of all, not most of all. Second to most of all, thank all of you out there for watching. We couldn't have a show without you. Most of all, thank you, God. Thank you, Jesus Christ, for because we wouldn't be able to do a show about talking things from a Christian perspective if there was no such thing. If God hadn't granted us his grace and mercy and all that.
Amen.
Without Christ, yes. So, all right. See you all next week. Thanks for joining us. God bless.